Hey guys, Coach Matheu here with our second video in the Play Like a World Champ series. And today I wanted to talk about the person who takes the title from Steinitz, and that would be Emanuel Lasker. So Lasker becomes the second official world champ in 1894 and is able to hold the title for 27 straight years. No one has done that since, and of course that's super difficult. It's actually almost impossible today. The rules were a little different back then. When it came to defending your title, you didn't have to defend your title every 2 years like today. You really only had to set up a match when you found someone who agreed to play with you and you found a sponsor. So you weren't constantly, like Lasker didn't have to constantly defend his title. But I'm not going to hate. I'm not going to take away from him. 27 years is still pretty impressive. And I wanted to show a game, not pretty impressive, very impressive. And I wanted to show a game that sort of lets us see like what does someone do in their games to help them stay on top and dominate chess for that long. So today we're going to look at Walter versus Lasker, 1923. Funnily enough, actually, this game is from after Lasker is no longer world champion, but I still think it's pretty instructive on how to play like world champ. So let's check it out. So Lasker's playing black. So white opens with d4. And Lasker plays d5, meeting that with symmetry. So already white has kind of clamped down on the e5 square. And black has met that by clamping down on the e4 square. Now e3, blocking the bishop. But as we'll see in a sec, there are some annoying d4 systems that come from playing e3 this early. So knight f6, continuing developing the knight on the king side, putting more pressure on this e4 square, and now white plays bishop d3. Typically, when I see a bishop d3 this early, I think that white is looking to play a stonewall system. So Lasker meets that. He goes bishop g4, which I think is a great move. And the idea is, let's say black played a move like, I don't know, let's say black played e6. White can go f4 now, and the idea is now they really clamp down on e5. And their idea, I'll just play a few more moves. So like bishop d6, knight f3, let's say you castle, knight bd7. The idea is put a knight on e5, annoy you. And whenever you get so annoyed that you want to take it, they take back with the f pawn, and now files are opening, diagonals are opening, queens can come out and attack your king. So I say all that to say bishop g4 is a good idea because f4 is not playable yet. You will lose your queen, and if you go f3, I can just back up, and now your pawn is pinned. And if anything, I can exchange the bishops, the light square bishops, which is also a key in that stonewall setup. So after bishop g4, white voluntarily steps into the pin after knight f3, and now black can continue development. e6, the bishop is outside of the pawn chain. c4, challenging the center. There's no reason for black to take here. You don't want to just hand over a center pawn to your opponent. Only trade when it makes sense for you, when it's better for you. So knight bd7. Simple. Let's continue developing. Here white goes queen b3. First move I'm a little suspicious about. Queen's attacking the pawn and stepping out of the pin. But this is the opening part of the game. There's not quite a reason to just go for a pawn for just the pawn's sake, especially with your queen. We should be developing smaller pieces here. So here, Lasker takes. And now pawn takes. Since the queen left, the queen was not able to defend the knight. And this pawn structure is ruined. And instead of defending the pawn with, say, rook b8 or queen c8, or even a move like b6, Lasker just plays c5, challenging the center and saying, please, I dare you to take my pawn. I'm going to open this game while your queen is running around taking pawns. So white says, okay. C takes d5. E takes d5. Queen takes b7. Okay, now white has won a pawn, but they're losing some time. two little pieces out, the minor pieces versus one minor piece and the queen out. Okay, now black takes on d4. E takes d4 and bishop d6. Now there's some open files. B file, C file, E file are open. Whoever can get rooks there first is going to have a great time. Knight c3, developing a knight, and now attacking the d5 pawn again. And once again, instead of developing, instead of Lasker moving a piece to defend the pawn, he just castles. And castles is probably the most underrated developing move. It gets your rook into the game and gets your king sort of out of the way while the rooks get to connect. And this is important. No matter what you want to do in chess, what I mean is whether you want to attack in a game or play defensively in a game, you're going to need your rooks connected. And we're going to see how that works in this game. So castle. And now white just takes the pawns. White's going around just chomping on pawns. And black plays a beautiful move here. Queen a5 check, attacking the king and the knight. So this is a fork. Now it doesn't win material because white has this move, knight c3, which now defends the knight and blocks the check. But Lasker has successfully connected the rooks. So the rooks can defend each other now. They can double easier now. Development has been completed for black, whereas this bishop still has to move. The king is still uncastled. This rook is still in the corner. So this could get a little dangerous. And now I really like this move. I would have completely missed this move. Queen h5. The queen swings to the other side of the board. There's a little target on f3. The queen has to keep an eye on this. And it's always good to have quick ways to win. Easy ways to win. If white says, you know what, I want to develop, I want to play good chess moves, and tries the castle, well, they get checkmated. And that's always good, to give your opponent easy ways to go wrong, easy ways to make a mistake. It's nice to set little traps for your opponent. So queen h5, and now the king can't castle. And this is important. Since the king can't castle, he has to stay in the center. Black would love for that king to stay in the center because he's got an open e-file and connected rooks able to take advantage of that. So it's not just, queen h5 is not just like, oh my gosh, I hope he castles, I hope he castles. Oh, he touched the king, I hope he castles. No, the idea is you can't play a move you like, so you have to stay in a situation you don't like. Your king on the open file. So now bishop goes to e2, covering the e file and keeping an eye on f3. Okay, Lasker goes rook a b8, getting that rook into the game on an open file and attacking the queen. It's always nice to develop a piece with a threat. Queen a6, stepping out of the way. Now the queen could take the pawn, but then f3 is a little weak, and the queen's going to have a hard time stepping back towards the center or the king side to defend. So for the first time, white chooses not to go pawn grabbing, goes queen a6. So the queen keeps an eye on the bishop and can slide back to the king side. Rook b6, very nice move. So Lasker doesn't just settle for the rook having half open file. He goes rook b6, and now still attacking the queen. The rook will be able to swing across the 6th rank once these pieces get out of the way. It can land on e6, g6, maybe even h6, and it's going to be able to do damage there. So queen goes back to d3, just getting a little closer to the king, defending some squares. And now finally this last rook comes into the game, and there's just no other square than e8 that's as good. Putting a rook on the same file as a king, especially when there are no pawns there, is a good idea. That's just a time-saving move on the clock. The rook is definitely active, and you've just pinned a piece. So once again, I mean, white should be a little uncomfortable here, but you can't castle to get out of it, which is important. Your opponent doesn't have an easy move to step out. So here, white goes knight e4. Once again, blocking the pin, blocking the e-file, and offering a trade. There is no reason to trade these knights. I mean, look what white gets now, a beautiful center. They're also attacking your queen. Already you can see the pieces are being denied squares. c5 is no longer in use, e5 no longer in use, d5, f5. So there's no reason to trade that. Only trade if you really have to. That's not the case. Or you know it does something better for you. And that's not the case here. We don't want to make improvements for our opponent. We want to make life difficult. On the board. So knight e4, knight d5, declining the trade. Also, f5 is on the table now, saying get out knight. And it's also useful to control the squares around a double pawn or in front of it. So black has nice control over f4, which would lock this pawn down. And here, white takes on d6. Not the greatest idea. I mean, the knight was covering the e file. But the idea is now, well, since the rook takes, white can castle. The problem is, since this knight has gone from f6, and now the rook is taking the bishop spot, this rook has free access to the 6th rank and gets to swing around. Whereas if we go back here, I said, well, we got to move these 2 pieces before this rook can really start swinging around. And here, like I was just saying, white makes a trade that helps out black. So here, white castles. And there's no checkmate anymore. And, I mean, rook g6 is an idea. And then when the king goes to h1, but then they're just in time with a move like rook g1. Now, this isn't the most comfortable position by any means, but white is surviving. So Lasker actually comes up with a genius approach. He goes rook d e6 first, hitting the bishop. And the idea is now when you play rook e1, which seems natural and covers the bishop, the idea of not developing your bishop and your rook. And by the way, this is another reason this move is so great, rook d e6, because the rooks are doubled and white can't play a developing move to deal with that threat. So that in the meantime, they have to deal with the pieces they have. And when you go rook e1, your rook is defending the bishop. It's defended twice by the queen and the rook. But no one is defending the rook. And that means the back rank is very weak. And that's only the case because the rooks aren't connected. When your rooks aren't connected, you're going to have back rank problems. So now, Lasker plays queen h3, get it nice and cozy next to the king. And we know when a queen gets this close to the king, mating nets are on the table. So a move like rook g6, very dangerous now. So to avoid that, white plays king h1, because now if rook g6, rook g1 is played. But Lasker actually had a better move on the brain. So the idea is with the king going to h1 to step out of the check, white has also set themselves up for a mating net. So if I'm ever able to play queen f1, that's going to be back rank checkmate. If I'm ever able to play rook e1, that's going to be back rank checkmate. And that's all because sleeping. So here, Lasker finds this nice move. He goes rook takes e2. And his idea is, yes, I know your queen and your rook are defending versus my only one defender back here. But you'll find you can't really take the way you want to because there's mate. So for instance, if you just take with the rook, well, bam, queen f1 mate. If you take with the queen, well, I can still take back because queen f1 mate. If you try to run away, let's say you go rook g1, you can just take on f2. And now I'm threatening rook takes h2 mate or queen takes h2 mate. And even if you try to stop it with the bishop f4, well, I just take your bishop. And this is just getting worse and worse. It's still checkmate threats and you're just losing more pieces. But at least you develop the bishop. So after rook takes e2, down a piece, and there are still tons of mate threats. And once again, we're seeing the weak back rank. White resigns. So there we go. Lasker did a great job in this of developing the pieces, castling, keeping the initiative, meaning making the threats, and setting pieces up where they could be active, giving his pieces chances to make threats later in the game. The bishop on d6. The bishop on d6 was able to threaten checkmate at some point. The queen on h5 was able to help with that. The rook on the e file was able to make threats. So Lasker giving a chance for his pieces to make threats. And that's how you stay the world champion, combined with a bit easier title defense setup. That's how you stay champion for 27 years. So we got to figure out who takes the title from this guy, Lasker. Until then, take care, guys.